Hey guys, Breadgut Gaming here, hope you're having a good day. This is my guide to custom faiths. We'll talk about my tenet tier list, my breakdown of doctrines, and finally some sample custom faiths. The first thing I consider with a custom faith is which religion or faith do I want to be a part of, since this will decide the pool of tenets that are available, the special decisions that are available, what kind of holy sites the faith has, and what bonuses I can get, and how far the holy sites are from my realm, and any extra main doctrines or any special doctrines that I might want. And rarely sometimes the pool of virtues and sins. Most faiths have 3 to 4 base virtues while Norse has 5. These are just some of the factors I consider, and at first I might feel decision paralysis. The nice thing about custom faiths is that you can always just keep creating a new faith as your needs or the situation changes. Like going to Lollardy just for anaconism so I could destroy more artifacts, or I can convert to things like miscellaneism for the equal inheritance so I could just give titles to my daughters, and then I can convert back to my personal religion, which might be male dominated. If anything, the most practical thing would be at least to make sure your pilgrimages are not too far, otherwise that would take up a lot of your time and you might die trying to go there. Otherwise, the foundation of a custom faith is the tenets. There are 3 major categories of tenets: common tenets that are available to every single religion, restricted tenets which are only available to certain religions, and within this category, religion-specific tenets that are only available to one religion. And the last is syncretism, which makes a certain religion a little more friendly to your faith. For my tier list, I tend to prefer learning lifestyles, living really long, and cranking up my development. And I've graded the tenets based on their benefits, how easy it is to obtain the benefits, and if there are any penalties. In general, the tenets are going to provide things like opinion for stability, conversion bonuses to spread faith, etc. I've also uploaded my tier list as a Google Sheet in the description. Also comment below if you know more about a tenet and got some ideas on how to better utilize it. The first one here is Megalithic Constructions. This allows you to construct megaliths in temples and also great megaliths in duchy capitals. It also gives some pretty good bonuses when you're in hills. When you look at the megalith, it gives both percent and flat development growth, which is good, but it doesn't give any taxes. You can also build a great megalith duchy building, which gives taxes, renown, lifestyle experience, and development growth, but it doesn't have additional upgrades, so this is pretty decent in the early game. If you're playing in hills and you love taxes and development, then Megalithic Constructions is an A for me. Otherwise, if you're not playing in hills, it's still about a B tier. Next is Communion. Characters can seek indulgences, which trades gold for piety, and they can seek forgiveness for their crimes. This is the strongest if you are the temporal head of faith and there are a lot of people following your faith, and you can accrue a lot of gold from your followers. This does require you to spread your faith far and wide for it to work, versus if it's a spiritual head of faith, all that gold will not go to you. Spiritual head of faiths can excommunicate other characters, which gives a criminal trait, and other rulers can wage war to depose that person. So I would put Communion as A tier if you are the temporal head of faith, but at best it would be C tier if it's spiritual head of faith. Esotericism makes wise man a virtue, and it makes it so that children with a learning focus can get the wise man trait. Naturally, wise man is pretty common and easy to get. So the first thing is that you basically get a guaranteed virtue, which is free opinion, and that's always solid. Once you become a wise man, you can hold a mystical communion, which gives you 300 learning lifestyle experience, and this decision can be taken every 5 years. That's equivalent to about a 20% XP boost, which is really big. You also get a stress bonus the entire time, so that's good as well. And although it says there'll be unforeseen side effects, this tenet also has an unlisted bonus of removing negative effects. So basically it's a guaranteed virtue, effectively a 20% lifestyle experience boost, and you get some stress buffs. However, if you don't like or use learning lifestyle, then this isn't really worth it. Personally, I love learning, so Esotericism is A tier for me. Pursuit of Power unlocks the Conquest Casus Belli, and that alone is really good because as a feudal lord, having that Casus Belli is really convenient instead of having to always fabricate claims or invite people with claims. It also reduces your tyranny gain and the cost to create titles, so it's perfect for expanding. It does reduce general opinion, and it makes the ambitious and disloyal virtues, so you might get more rowdy vassals and eventually more factions. but overall they're manageable, so Pursuit of Power is S tier for me. Next I have Ritual Cannibalism. This makes it so the cannibal trait is no longer criminal, and also makes cannibal a double virtue, so you get plus 20 opinion. And now getting cannibal is easy. As long as you have a prisoner, when you execute them, you have the option to devour them. So that's a very easy way to get a double virtue. There is also another plus 35 opinion of other cannibal characters. So when your vassals also become cannibals, you get a massive plus 55 opinion. It can take some time for your vassals to naturally get the cannibal trait. So this tenet is best paired with things like Pursuit of Power and other warmongering tenets to promote war for more prisoners. Non-cannibals will hate you more, but because it's so consistent at providing a lot of opinion, I have cannibalism as A tier. Cranial Trophies is basically a better version of human sacrifice. Not only do you get piety for executions, but sometimes you get an artifact, and this can be used to gain some resources, or you could just sell it for a little bit of gold. If you manage to capture someone important like King Charles, then when you execute him, you get better Cranial Trophy with even more stats. For me, I'd put Cranial Trophies as B tier. Astrology gives you access to divine the stars, so when you take the decision, you get this random buff to one of the 5 lifestyles, and it's a pretty big boost, but because it's random, some people might not like it. I don't mind it because my rulers are long-lived, so they have time to finish most of the trees. Otherwise, it's mainly just to give you some naval speed, so it really depends on your playstyle. So I have Astrology as B tier. Sacred Murder unlocks the Master Assassin position, which gives you reduced hostile scheme phase length, which is probably the most useful. It also protects you against enemy hostile schemes a bit, and the prowess and the advantage are 3 bonuses. When used for intrigue, Sacred Murder is definitely A tier. Sacred Lies' biggest bonus is that agents are more willing to join. They get plus 20 agent acceptance. However, it's pretty easy to just bribe someone, or if they're not accepting, you can just double bribe them. So you can bribe them first, then you can bribe them again. You earn 50 piety for successful intrigue schemes, which is not that much. Otherwise, if you're not really scheming, you can improve the bounties for whispers. This one's not bad because it can reveal schemes without having to suffer stress or vassal opinion. It still is simpler to just redouble the guards or use your spy master. Therefore, Sacred Lies is C tier for me, even if we're focused on intrigue. Communal Identity increases the conversion speed of a county, but only if it has your culture, or the culture speed if it has your faith. The mount is pretty big, but this is a little harder to activate than just Mendicant Preachers, which is more consistent. It also makes conversion speed a lot slower if it's different culture. So the primary use of this is just to really speed up the promotion of the culture speed in your realm. The extra 10 faith opinion is nice, but it's not game breaking. So to me, this belongs in C tier. Mendicant Preachers is very simple. I don't know why, but it's always been missing a % sign here, but it gives 33% counter conversion speed. It also makes temperate a virtue. It allows you to become an adventurer, and you get a little bonus when you finish a pilgrimage, which is Poverty's Journey, and it reduces Holy Order cost, which is not that crazy of a bonus. But despite its simplicity, Mendicant Preachers is still A tier. Legalism primarily makes it so that vassals and counties are less likely to join factions if you have a lot of virtues, versus they're more likely if you are sinful. It also makes just a double virtue. So this is best combined with easy virtues like Cannibalism. Legalism is even stronger if you have Wards and Warden DLC. You get access to Influence Ward's personality option, so this makes it pretty consistent to pass on a just trait. You can also go to your courtiers and get a Wet Nurse, and there's an Instill Virtue task, and that can keep your heirs very virtuous. So if you have the DLC, then Legalism I'd say is A tier, otherwise it's probably B tier. Exaltation of Pain gives you piety when you torture prisoners, and it makes sadistic and flagellant virtues. A lot of CK3 players like sadistic because it lets you kill your own children, but personally I like a lot of children. The tenet also unlocks the decision to indulge in flagellation, so there's a 20% chance that you can get the virtuous trait. However, you always get wounded, so you might die before you get this trait, and as a stress relief this can kill you as well. So personally I think it belongs in C tier. Divine Marriage makes it so that you have plus 10 opinion from vassals of the same faith, and if you have incestuous or pure-blooded, then those are virtues, with pure-blooded being a double virtue. If you're building a genetics program, then it's pretty easy to always have pure-blooded, so that means that you'll always have at least a plus 30 total opinion to your vassals. But if you're not doing a genetics program, then it might be hard to maintain pure-blooded in your bloodline, so then this bonus is not easy to maintain. brain. So if you do a genetics program, I'd say it's B tier. Otherwise, it just has 10 faith opinion. Next, I have Carnal Exaltation. This makes lustful a virtue and chaste a sin, but the main thing is that it's required for making deviancy virtuous. Deviancy is a little tricky to pass on. One method is to invite a deviant courtier and have them give it to you. The second would be to increase your stress, then you'll potentially get the deviant trait. It does give a good amount of fertility, so you can convert to this if you have a succession crisis, but overall I would put it in C tier. Next, I have Monasticism. This allows you to ask courtiers to take vows to become a monk, which basically disinherits them. It's actually pretty useful in the early game, but it's not needed in the late game, so I would put it at C tier. Next, I have Ritual Celebrations. This gives 100 extra piety when you host a feast or a festival, and it also unlocks breweries inside temples. The brewery building is pretty decent, has a little bit of development growth, but it has a massive amount of popular opinion, so it can be pretty useful for getting rid of peasant factions. Once you build this up to the max, then you can just swap to a different faith, and you don't have to keep ritual celebrations. It also gives a little bit of vassal opinion, but not that much. Catholicism also unlocks breweries even without the ritual celebrations tenet, and there's a cultural tradition that lets you build breweries in cities, so if you wanted to, you could stack city and temple breweries. Overall, I would say ritual celebrations is a C tier. Literalism first makes learning education traits virtues in addition to scholar, so it's a pretty consistent way to get at least 2 virtues. However, if you don't like learning education, then this is useless. The literist debate can let you debate with your vassals, and you can get a little bit of piety, but honestly it's easier to just go on a pilgrimage or do something else for piety. So this gives 2 easy virtues, but one of them takes time to come online, so I'd rank it as C or C+. Unrelenting Faith makes it so that clergy member can serve as commanders or knights, and everyone gets 4 prowess and some hostility advantage. This ability to serve as commanders or knights does appear in the clerical function doctrines. If you have recruitment here, then just having this doctrine can save you this tenet. In addition, other tenets like Warmonger also allows members of clergy to serve as commanders or knights, so this could be a little bit redundant. This prowess bonus does stack with recruitment or your clergy members, so I would put it at C tier. Next, I have Communal Possessions. This makes peasant leader a double virtue, gives you big piety for marrying peasants and gifting artifacts, and it reduces building costs and gives popular opinion, but it reduces control growth. This tenet really requires collective lands tradition to work properly. This tradition makes peasant leader inheritable, otherwise it's really hard to get the trait. This also gives peasant leader development growth on top of the growth already from the tradition. It also lets you give the trait to commoners if you land them, meaning another 25 opinion for having the same trait for a total of 45. There is a total of minus 40% control growth, but that's easily overcome by buildings. You can always find a lowborn spouse for your children, and you can set the appropriate marriage so the children will be of your dynasty. Once they're betrothed or married, then you can just grant this peasant a title, and then this guy will get the peasant leader trait, and eventually he'll pass it to your grandchildren. This tenet is solidly A tier for me, as long as you grab the tradition. Otherwise, it's useless. Next, we have Mind Without Mind. It makes it so characters are 50% less likely to get the infirm trait, and although the health penalties can be easily overcome if you just go into the whole of body tree for some iron constitution, becoming infirm makes it so you can't participate in activities like hunts or grand tournaments, etc., and that can get in the way of your goals or maximizing your health. I also dug up the math, and this tenet is the same as robust with a 50% reduction. Herculean is stronger at 70%. These all do stack if you really don't want to become infirm, but otherwise you get the same effect if you breed in the robust trait. The stress gain is so-so, but the artifacts is decent. Overall, I would put this tenet at the C tier. Next, I have Asceticism. This lets you meditate in seclusion. This lets you lose stress, and it can sometimes flip a sin into a virtue. However, it only flips these specific traits, so sometimes those are not even relevant to your specific faith, and flipping only happens inside steppes, mountains, and desert mountains. So then the benefits are pretty hard to pull off, or sometimes detrimental to your needs. So I would put Asceticism as C tier. Next is Gnosticism. This makes it so other Gnostic and dualist faiths are considered righteous, and you also get a decent amount of stress relief when you give away titles. However, reducing stress is easily done with other things like activities or just stress traits, but this is not too useful. Considering other faiths to be righteous has pretty niche uses, like with tax non-believers, so I would put this at D tier. Next is Natural Primitivism. This makes it so that adherents don't wear clothes clothes, and there's also some stress bonuses here. It also requires though that all the crime doctrines be at least shunned or accepted, so you do lose a reason to imprison your vassals. I think most people get this just for the do not wear clothes part. So I have this at D tier. Religious law allows a high learning ruler to condemn their sinful vassals. As long as the vassal has more sins than you do, so this guy has 1 and I have 0, then there will be a condemned sins interaction, and you'll need at least 14 learning. But once you have enough learning, you can spend 100 piety to get a title revocation reason, and you'll be able to revoke any of his titles. This can be better than if you were fabricating a claim, because at most this will give you a duchy, but this revocation reason will allow you to revoke any title. There is a 5-year cooldown to condemn sins, so I have this at C, maybe C+ tier. Sanctioned false conversions gives characters and counties resistance to conversion and makes it so that they can reconvert back to this faith if they are led astray. I haven't really found a big use for these type of bonuses, so if you do, let me know. And the intrigue lifestyle experience down here is not that much, so it's probably more efficient to pick something else if you're going for a full intrigue build. So I place it at D tier. Sacred Childbirth reduces pregnancy complications by 50%, but the chance of complications is already pretty low. It makes pregnant a virtue, but pregnant is only a trait that you have while you are pregnant, so this virtue is not permanent. It does have an unwritten increase for the Child of Destiny event, but that event is already rare, so this tenet is not that powerful. So it goes into D tier for me. Next is Sacred Mountains. It gives a few mountain related bonuses to traits, and you get more piety from pilgrimages to hills and mountains, and it does reduce the cost of new holdings by a good amount, but it's pretty simple to just convert to this faith, take advantage of the discount, and then convert to something else. So Sacred Mountains is C tier. Next we have the Pentarchy, which gives you +1 yearly fervor per holy site held, mainly used to keep your fervor high, so it can be helpful when your realm gets really big and you want to prevent heresies, but most times that's not very necessary, so I've put it into C tier. Next we have Chthonic Redoubts. This gives some advantage in attrition in the mountains, and it makes converting faster for your faith and harder for enemy faiths in mountains, so it's very mountain flavored, but the benefits themselves are not too strong. So Chthonic Redoubts is D tier. Next is Sanctity of Nature. They've buffed this pretty decently because now it gives development growth, and the downside is just increased holding cost and time, which is a one-time thing. So if you are in these terrain, this is pretty decent for advantage and development growth, but if you're not, then it's unneeded. So I have Sanctity of Nature at C tier. Adaptive improves your relations with your liege of a different faith, and it reduces the factions of infidel vassals. It seems to be focused for if you're playing a vassal of a different faith, which is very niche. So adaptive is D tier to me. Polyamory makes it so that adherents don't get opinion penalties or imprisonment reasons on their spouses for having extramarital relationships. But the funny part is that in order to even get this, you need to make it so that both adultery is accepted. The one unlisted benefit here is that it does list who the true father is every time, but I've never needed it for a genetics program, and in fact the target of seduction also needs to have polyamory for this benefit to work. So polyamory is D tier to me. Next we have Righteous Rebirth, which again has these conversion resistance things that I just don't know what they're used for. It also makes peasant and populist factions more common and more powerful. So unless you're trying to farm your peasants for battles and prisoners, or if you're just trying to convert a bunch of lands before ditching it to your rival so they can suffer peasant revolts, this one seems very negative. So Righteous Rebirth is D tier. And lastly we have Vows of Poverty. This makes it so you can take a vow of poverty decision. This reduces your monthly income by 20% in exchange to get 2 piety per month. It's probably much easier to just take the gold you would have paid to just go on a pilgrimage instead of making this vow. So Vows of Poverty is D tier to me. The next category we're going over is the restricted tenets. So these are only available to certain religions, and if you wonder what the requirements are, you can go to CK3 wiki and they'll have the icons there. If you don't really recognize what the icons are, you can just right click it, and if you open a new image, then the very end will kind of give you a hint as to what religion it is. So the first tenet is Warmonger, which is really strong because you just get a constant conquest casus belli, and it also enables great holy wars. Clergy can also serve as commanders or knights. It also flips your realm to at peace opinion instead of offensive war opinion. so it's perfect for constant conquering. So I've placed that as S tier. Next, there's armed pilgrimages, and this makes it so that you can have a great holy war if you have a head of faith, and if you don't have a head of faith, you get 25% extra conversion bonus per holy site that's controlled, meaning you can have up to 125% extra conversion, and it also reduces the piety cost of a holy war, so that means you and your vassals can holy war more often. I would put armed pilgrimages at S tier. Islam faiths have struggle and submission, which is pretty similar, where if you have a head of faith, you can also declare a great holy war, and if you don't, you get that same 25% conversion bonus per holy site. The difference here is they gain more devotion and piety from holy wars instead of a holy war casus belli reduction. They also get compensated with being able to become an adventurer. So this one's probably a little weaker than armed pilgrimages, but both are very good, but it still belongs in S tier. Next is Alexandrian Catechism. If you like learning, then this gives a massive reliable amount of learning experience, and it makes scholar a guaranteed virtue, which is also pretty nice. If you don't use learning, then it's useless. Since I love learning, then it's S tier for me. Similar is the pursuit of knowledge tenet. This also gives a big flat bonus to learning lifestyle experience, but it's a little stronger because it makes all of the learning education traits virtues, and it has scholar and Confucian education as virtues, so you could have up to 3 virtues, so this one's definitely S tier for me. Next is Adorcism. This enables seek aid of the spirit's decision, and this decision lets you give a big, small, or no offering, and depending on how good your priest is, then you can have up to 85% chance of a good outcome. This chance is maxed out if your priest has 20 learning and also the wise man trait. For the positive outcomes, you can gain shrewd, strong, or temporary good modifier. Because it's a bit RNG, and there's a chance you can be unlucky and get really devastating things like impotent trait here, Adorcism's good, but it remains B tier. Next is Dharmic Pacifism. Makes it so you can't holy war or a raid, but it gives you 10 opinion with other pacifists, and it gives you +1 domain limit. So the bonuses are pretty good for a realm that is already settled and not conquering anymore, but otherwise not useful if you still need your holy war casus belli. So I have Dharmic Pacifism at B tier. Other faiths have access to pacifism, which is very similar with the 10 opinion, domain limit, and inability to holy war, so I've also placed that at B tier. Reincarnation gives county conversion resistance. There's also a 4% chance when children turn 9 they will become the reincarnation of an ancestor. There's also a decision to have divine reincarnation, and your child will inherit the appearance from a grandparent or a great-grandparent. You'll get the reincarnation trait, which is not that strong. So this tenet's mostly for fun, so I'd rank it as D tier. Next, there is tax non-believers. This gives a massive 20% to domain taxes if the county is of a different faith. So this is where things like the Gnosticism tenet can be useful, because this will make it so other Gnostic faiths are considered righteous. So you can create one faith with Gnosticism and then convert your realm into that faith, and then create a second faith with tax non-believers, and that will permanently give you a 20% boost to your taxes. There's a lot of other faiths, like these Buddhist and Confucian faiths have immaterial harmony so that everyone's considered righteous. Or the other Buddhist or Hindu faiths, they also have multi-religious interweaving. Muslim faiths also have the special doctrine that automatically gives them jizya, which is the same thing as tax non-believers. Zoroastrian faiths also have another main doctrine where it considers other faiths to be astray. And similarly, Jewish faiths also have a extra main doctrine that considers other faiths of the same type to be astray. So there's a lot of ways to create subservient county faiths to take full advantage of taxing non-believers. So I have taxed non-believers at B tier. Next, there's Anaconism. This is very useful since this will also allow you to destroy artifacts for a good amount of piety. So this is pretty good early game, but it also really boosts temple construction. So this is good if you have lay clergy where you hold the temples yourselves. And Anaconism lets you destroy illustrious and famed artifacts. So if you don't need the temple bonuses, then you can always convert to this just to break artifacts and then convert back. Overall, I would put Anaconism at A tier. Next is Takumen. This makes it so you get a bear appearance every 5 years, and it makes Hunter a virtue, which is very consistent. It also makes cornering bears more likely to succeed. You can also capture the bears and and then use this decision to sacrifice them for either massive piety, a pretty good attacking buff, and 10% holding tax as an extra control. And because this lasts 5 years, you can basically have one of these permanently, so this is pretty good. It also says that you get prowess and martial here, but I haven't found this to be true, so if someone can figure it out, or if it's just that Paradox needs to fix this. The only downside I could think of is that you need gold to go on hunts, and you also need time to go on these hunts. So if you're busy with something else, then you might only want to pick this up in the late game. Overall, the sightings and bonuses make it A tier, and even more so if the martial gain is fixed. Next is Bhakti. This enables you to take the determined Bhakti decision, and this will let you pick one of 3 buffs, depending the type of faith you have. The bonuses are pretty versatile, but they're not overpowered. So I've placed that at B tier. Gruesome Festivals will give you piety for executions, so this is pretty useful in the early game when you need a lot of piety, or if you're doing a lot of holy wars, but otherwise it's good enough to just spam some pilgrimages. So I have Gruesome Festivals at C tier. Human Sacrifice is the non-DLC version, so similarly it's useful in the early game. It can be slightly more relevant because you can have the raid for Captus Casus Belli against neighboring realms, but nothing game breaking here. It also shares the same image as Exaltation of Pain, but they are both C tier to me anyways. Ancestor Worship makes it so that children get a lot of prestige when they're born, and there's a pretty big buff to the long reign bonus. This is pretty useful for tribal realms because your heirs can have a lot of prestige, and the long reign bonus can be nice to also have good predecessor opinion, but that also assumes that you live long. So I've put Ancestor Worship at C tier. Harmonious Society here is between a C and a D for me, mainly because this line says vassals are more likely to have the zealot vassal stance. The reason zealot vassals are nice, you can change your faith to having mandatory. This gives you a bit of a penalty to piety and opinion, but as soon as you gain the pilgrim trait, then those penalties are offset. The main thing is you get plus 10 zealot vassal opinion at base, plus another 30 here and another 60 there for a total of plus 100. So if this significantly increases most of your vassals to become zealot, then that can make your realm pretty stable. But because it doesn't say significantly more, I'm gonna assume the power of this is anywhere between C and a D for now. Making schemes more successful and giving piety and also temperate is nice, but it's also not that big of a deal. So again, it's between a C, maybe a D. Ritual Suicide lets you end your life when you're old, incapable, or near death without any of the penalties. You can already suicide in other ways, and in my opinion, the longer your ruler lives, the better. The short reign duration is also pretty nice, but it's also easily replaced with artifacts. Therefore, I put it as D tier. Hedonistic gives you 100 piety for hosting feasts and festivals, and it makes gluttonous a virtue. The problem with gluttonous is that you're more likely to get obese and therefore die early. So if you really want the piety gain from feasts, it's probably better to just get ritual celebrations if it's available to you. So I have it as D tier. Next is Inner Journey. This one's similar to Asceticism, but it's better because it only adds 1 sin instead of 3, but overall this is still not that useful. So I've placed it as D tier. Next is Rite. This lets you keep your old head of faith when you create a new faith, and this is also the only time when a new Christian faith can keep ecumenism. This means you're allowed to still ask for gold from the Pope. However, when the Pope goes on a crusade, that's why these insular lords are not invited to join, because they're still a different faith. So it's probably better to just convert to Catholicism just so you can participate in those crusades. So I've put right into D tier. Ritual Hospitality allows you to host other characters as a guest, which can be accessed by right-clicking, and in the personal section, there's a host as honored guest interaction. So this just spends a little bit of piety for opinion, and even if you have like 100 diplomacy, it doesn't change the amount that you gain. So it's a lot more efficient if you just have good diplomacy and just send them a gift. So it's not very useful of a tenet. So I have Ritual Hospitality as D tier. Benevolent Governance unlocks the inspection activity, and you can also pay for it using piety. However, because the inspection activity is so early in the perk tree, I personally think it's a waste to use an entire tenet just for the inspection. So I have Benevolent Governance as D tier. Allow piety makes it so children are less likely to get burdened, and parents automatically get perpetual hook, and there's increased opinion. There's no real bonuses here because your children already get a pretty big bonus, so I think it's totally unnecessary and mostly just for flavor. So Falau piety is D tier. The next subcategory are are also restricted tenets, but they're restricted to only a single religion. The first is preservation, which gives you 0.2 development when you build a holding in the church or temple citadel, and also allows the construction of monasteries in all holding types, and it reduces some building and holding costs. So I can definitely see this tenet in helping a mandala realm from racing to 100 development quickly. If you're playing Mandala, it's definitely S tier. Auspicious Birthright gives a 5% chance your children can just be born with the Wise Man trait, which becomes a 5 times virtue, which is massive. You can also combine it with Esotericism if you like learning. This makes it so that Wise Man is even more likely to be obtained. And even if you don't get it through either birth or Esotericism, simply by having the learning focus will trigger some events that might give you Wise Men. And as you travel and interact, there's going to be a lot of events to get Wise Men. So this is pretty much always a plus 50 opinion. It does require the extra tenet to be optimal, so I'm going to put it as B tier. Extinction of Dharma makes it so that faiths in the same religion are considered evil. It also makes it so that, similar to Anaconism, rulers can destroy artifacts or piety, including the illustrious and famed artifacts. You also get a special decision that you can take, and you also get piety for executing followers within the same religion. There's also a minus 100% piety penalty here. On the wiki, it says you can't gain piety normally, but I've found that you can still get piety from pilgrimages. It's just that you're going to suffer this 100% penalty that can be countered by other things. You see that it's still positive right now. Now, the thing with it making it evil is that normally Buddhist faiths consider each other astray, and that's because multi-religious interweaving. So with this regular Buddhist faith, when I try to declare war, there's no holy war casus belli. But once you've added extinction of Dharma, now you consider these other Buddhist faiths to be evil. So if we go back to that guy, then we'll actually get holy war casus belli. And that includes a lot of these East Asian Buddhist faiths as well. So you can declare holy war on China. Now, the one other extra thing is that for some of these Confucian or Chinese-based Buddhist faiths, there's an additional special doctrine of immaterial harmony, which is a little higher than multi-religious. This makes it astray, but immaterial makes it so that everyone's considered righteous. When you create a new faith with the extinction of Dharma, the weird thing is that they consider us evil, but we still consider them righteous. And I think that's because this immaterial harmony is overriding this extinction of Dharma. So you can't actually use extinction of Dharma with immaterial harmony for now. Just note that. In terms of the special decision over here, if you fulfill these requirements here, then you will get a special army containing peasant troops, and this will scale with your realm size. So it's possible to get like 100,000 men if your realm is huge. These peasants aren't that strong, but you can use this to just suppress factions with the military threshold. The other thing you gain is this Maitreya Incarnate modifier, which gives a lot of taxes and a lot of same faith opinion, but it does make it so that other faiths really hate you, so you do destroy your chance of diplomacy with others, but that's very befitting of the name Extinction of Dharma. Overall, this is a pretty strong tenet and can definitely be used in a lot of playthroughs. So I've placed this as A tier. Household Gods is only available to Hellenic faiths and only if you've restored the Roman Empire, and this is very strong for the Roman Empire because you will always have Augustus, which is a virtue. So on top of already having plus 10 opinion, you get another plus 10 opinion, and as long as you're playing in Constantinople, then you'll get Born in the Purple, which also gives you another virtue guaranteed. It also gives you a decent amount of influence, and it makes it so that you get all the benefits of communal identity without the penalties. So this can be pretty useful for spreading your faith and culture. So this is S tier, maybe A tier if you don't plan to spread your culture. Sacrificial Ceremonies combines ritual suicide and human sacrifice, so it's pretty decent early game, but not as relevant later. It also repeats an icon, but it works out that it's still C tier. Sacred Destruction gives a flat 10% men-at-arms damage, which is pretty nice for min-maxing, and you get 50 piety from winning a siege, so this can help you continue declaring holy wars. So it's not too bad, but there are other easy ways to get both the damage and the piety. So I think it's C tier. Sun Worship gives you 250 piety per feast in May, June, or July, so it's a lot more piety for feasts than the other tenets, but this is still not too compelling. The main draw though is for the roleplay of being able to sentence people to sun trials. Overall, I would say it's C tier. Pastoral Isolation seems to be geared for when you're a vassal of a different faith liege, but this is really not useful as a tenet. This tenet belongs in D tier. And the third category is Syncretism tenets, and in general, general, they're going to make it so that the target religion is going to consider you and is considered by you to be hostile instead of evil. You can also use their artifacts at full benefit, and you get plus 30 mutual opinion with those faiths. And that also includes popular opinion. There are 6 types for Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all Dharmic, all Sinitic, and all unreformed. So in my opinion, this is mainly for if you don't plan to really fight against a religion in your area and you kind of just want to be at peace with them, or if you're trying to roleplay. I would say most of these are probably considered D rank or niche use. Alright, so that's my tenet tier list. So what's important or strong to you will vary based on your playstyle. Next, I'll discuss my thoughts on doctrines, which are also based on preference and playstyle, but also are heavily influenced by the tenets you pick. So for gender, in the early game, either of the dominant choices are okay because it'll help limit your inheritance. When you get to single heir inheritance, then equal is better in my opinion, since this lets you land more family members, which means more renown, and since there's a lot of dynasty opinion artifacts, they will also be happier vassals. The only downside is that there's more claimants, but that's usually not a problem. For religious attitude, pluralist is nice if you plan to be in a diverse area and you don't want to be bothered with converting, versus fundamentalist would make it so that you can really homogenize your realm's religion, versus righteous is usually a pretty good middle ground, and this also influences the defender of the faith perk. Between the three, righteous is probably the best, with fundamentalist being the second. For clerical tradition, I would only use lay clergy when I plan to use communion or when I plan to play a small realm or there are special temples I need to use. Otherwise, theocratic is usually easier to maximize taxes, and it's easier to make one priest happy than to min-max your vassal taxes. For head of faith, there's no optimal choice. Temporal allows you to do communion so you get the gold. You also can roleplay as the god king of your faith, and you can control where the crusades go. Spiritual just enables crusades in general, and the gold is pretty nice. None, although it disables crusades, this can rapidly help you spread your religion if you're using armed pilgrimages or struggle and submission. So this will really depend on what kind of tenets you take and whether you want to do great holy wars. For pilgrimages, forbidden could be used for the advantage against co-religionist in the early game, but this will make pilgrim a sin. Otherwise, between encouraged, local rites, and mandatory, I personally like mandatory because it really just buffs up the pilgrim trait, and as soon as you go on one pilgrimage, it just counteracts these penalties easily. The only thing is I'm not sure if the AI will go on more pilgrimages and therefore spend more gold here instead of building up the realm. For theism, depends on personal choice. Monotheist might be slightly better, only because from evil vassals you can usually revoke their titles, versus for polytheist, you can't revoke from them. For marriage type, I would say polygamy usually is the best because you can have up to 4 alliances and you can swap between the spouses for their skills. I also like to have a genetics program, so I like having a lot of kids. Versus for concubines, you only get 1 alliance. The advantage is that you can dismiss these concubines and you can give your vassals concubines so that they like you a little bit better as well. Monogamy is not bad in the early game because you get a big bonus to gold or prestige, but I will usually go from monogamy to polygamy. For divorce, since I always do a genetics program, I always like always allowed. Must be approved is not bad if you become the head of faith. That way you can control your children and vassals' divorces, versus the only benefit for disallowed is preventing your children from divorcing people you want them to be married to. For bastardry, I think legitimization is the only way to go. No legitimization doesn't make sense because you might as well just always keep the option available in case you don't get any heirs. And no bastards, while it sounds nice, I've found that if the child is born with a different faith, then they can be born a bastard and there's no way to legitimize them even if you convert them to your faith. So I think legitimization is the only option for me. Consanguinity, no question, I always have unrestricted because that's necessary for a genetics program, but this is completely personal preference. For the crimes, this really depends on your preference. Setting everything to criminal means that there's more chances to imprison vassals, but also potentially your heir can be a hated supervillain, which you can't control. Personally, I do everything accepted, and I'm grateful when my family sleeps around so that my genetics program can expand. So at the least, I usually set adultery to accepted. For witchcraft and deviancy, if you can have them to be virtuous, then there's no reason not to, because that's just an extra virtue to give more vassal opinion. For a clerical function, for me it's between recruitment or control, depending on whatever I need. Recruitment is pretty useful for the commanders and knights, although it does reduce reduce your taxes by a little bit. But if you don't want to pay that tax, then control growth is always nice. Balance and pacification just doesn't make sense. There's no reason to pay taxes to appease peasants. For gender, I usually do either, so you have more options. Marriage, it doesn't really matter. For clerical appointment, I almost only go for temporal revocable because I want to appoint the best one. Spiritual revocable is not too bad if you don't have that many people of your faith, but it's very easy to convert people to your faith. For funerary tradition, all of them are pretty decent. I like sky burials just for the disease resistance, but cremation's not bad because it reduces the cost by a lot. Mummification can be nice since you get an artifact, but you'll get so many artifacts that I don't find this necessary. Coronation-wise, having anointment lets you go from crowned to anointed, which gains a little bit of opinion, but having either anointment option does mean you need the spiritual head of faith, so it's going to depend on what you want for head of faith. Alright, so now let's go over some example builds. So the first build is called Pacifism. This is if I'm like surrounded by the same faith rulers, and basically what this faith does is, with Pursuit of Power, we get a Conquest Casus Belli, so then we don't have to slowly fabricate claims. There is a -10 direct vassal opinion, so to counteract that, you can also have Pacifism, which gives you +10 opinion if you're in the same faith. Despite losing the Holy War, the Conquest makes up for it. It also increases your domain limit by 1, and we have Mendicant Preachers to increase the speed of converting the new realm. So the doctrines I changed that kind of matter would be like, we can go fundamentalist just for increased conversion speed. I made everything criminal since Pursuit of Power makes ambitious and disloyal virtues, so you might get more of those vassals. That way you can control them a little better. The next faith I used to min-max knights in this video. The faith at the time I had was Unrelenting Faith for 4 prowess, Sacred Murder for 2 prowess, Warmonger. When you combine it with North Germanic heritage, then there's a chance that your courtiers can get the Berserker trait, and that's another +5 prowess. My custom faith is also based on the Asatru faith, and 2 of their holy sites give prowess based on the level of devotion. In addition, I accepted all the crimes so that my courtiers won't lose levels of devotion and therefore prowess. I also stacked recruitment, and with the theocratic vassal, those 2 actually stack, and you can see there's some of the holy sites down here. And a lot of these other bonuses are also in combination with my culture. So Sorceress Metallurgy here also gives prowess per level of devotion, and so does Warrior Priests. So that's why I made all the crimes accepted, so that these vassals can keep a high level of devotion. And with a genetics program, they're going to live really long, and by living long enough, then they can build up their level of devotion. Now this is also before the update where I could have changed Sacred Murder for Cranial Trophies to get 1 extra prowess, but this build was already pretty good where most of my knights had around 60 prowess. Next is what I call the Pope Takeover. We have Communion along with Temporal Head of Faith so that we collect all the gold. We also have Pursuit of Power so that we get Conquest Casus Belli and we can spread our new Catholicism to the neighboring Catholic rulers. Mendicant Preachers will increase the conversion speed, and Fundamentalists will also boost that speed as well. Picking a Catholic faith also makes it possible that you can mend the Great Schism if you happen to control these titles, and once you do this, then most of the Christian world will now convert to your specific Christian faith. So all of these counties and sometimes these rulers will convert to this new faith and therefore start paying you taxes. And this decision can only be taken by Christian faith, so that's why you can go on the CK3 wiki and you can take a look at the special decisions here, including this Mend the Great Schism. You'll see there's 80% chance for each character to convert to your new faith. Once you form the big realm, you could create a faith that has legalism and ritual cannibalism to help keep your realm more stable, since cannibal will be a double virtue, and legalism makes it so that more virtuous rulers have less factions. The third tenet could be whatever you want. I could go for extra virtues like literalism, makes it so that any of these learning education traits are virtues, and also scholars of virtue as well. Or I could do something like Warmonger to be more aggressive to spread my faith, or even like Takuman, since this makes it so hunter is a virtue as well. Basically, we're just stacking virtues so legalism can work better. And just be sure to try to demand the conversion of your vassals before you become a cannibal, but once they are converted, then you can go and eat someone, and then that way you get the cannibal trait. And you can see that our opinion jumped by a lot when we ate that person, versus the ones that are still the old faith, they might be a little harder to convert. But this works great with new vassals, because when you grant it to someone of your culture and faith, then they already love you a lot because of cannibal. So in this way, you can conquer new lands and have vassals apostles that really love you. And finally, you can do things like creating a subservient faith. In this case, I picked the Jewish faith since they have an extra doctrine that considers Samaritan faiths to be righteous. I created one subservient faith that has this Samaritan, then I created this new faith that's also Samaritan, so we consider each other righteous. But in my new faith, I have taxed the non-believers. That way, when I look into my holdings here, although it's a different faith, they consider us righteous, so there's no real popular opinion penalties here, and therefore I won't have peasant factions, but I'll get that 20% extra tax. You can have an Ashari faith. This actually already has tax the non-believers or jizya as a special doctrine, and because it has this extra doctrine of Sunni, it will consider other faiths with the same head of faith as righteous. So like if your realm is Ashari and you just converted to Muwalladism, then that's also Sunni, so they consider each other righteous, and that way you can also benefit from the bonus 20% tax. Alright, so those are just some examples of custom builds. There are many ways to play CK3, and what matters to you will depend on your playstyle and where you're playing. If you like this video, please subscribe and give a like. It helps me tremendously, so thank you so much. Leave a comment if you have any questions or requests. Thanks again from Brad God, and have a good day.